few more minutes so that people can log on and get comfortable. So bear with us. We will begin in just a few minutes. All right, it looks like everybody is in this meeting. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our Timken virtual talk. We are thrilled to have you here with us today. I'm Christina Rosenberg, and I'll be your host today. I will be ensuring that everything runs smoothly while our speaker, Eleanor Merle, will give her talk. And before we dive in, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items to ensure our event runs smoothly. Please note that this talk is being recorded and streamed live on Facebook. This allows us to share today's session with a broader audience. And to minimize any background noise, we kindly ask that everyone remains muted throughout the presentation, and this really will ensure a better experience for all participants. And then if you have any questions or comments, we encourage you to write them down in the chat section during the talk, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the talk, and Eleanor will address your questions then. And as mentioned before, our speaker today is Eleanor Merle. She has prepared a talk entitled Painted Love in celebration of Valentine's Day. And thank you very much, Eleanor. I'll pass the word over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Well, greetings and welcome to today's virtual tour with the Timken. As Christina said, my name is Eleanor Merle, and I'm delighted to be with you today for our presentation, Painted Love. Now, it's no surprise that throughout history, love has been one of the most frequently and most beautifully depicted subjects. After all, what could be more romantic than the act of trying to capture on canvas a feeling that is at once so elusive and so universal? Tender embraces, passionate outbursts, stolen kisses. Artists have been representing the dramatic, mind-altering effects of love for centuries. So join me today, just in time for Valentine's Day, in celebrating love in all its painted forms. And where better to start than, I am going to, one moment, please. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so sorry. So we're better than to start than in ancient Egypt. So here we have two men described in the hieroglyphics as royal confidants. Their bond seems intimate. The presence of their wives and offspring in certain panels among the glyphs has led many Egyptologists to conclude that they were siblings, and repeated depictions of the two men embracing have convinced many that their intimate relationship might have been accepted by their respective wives. One thing is certain: two men of equal social standing being buried together in the same tomb, in spite of the fact that they were undoubtedly married to women, was unique. The mystery may remain forever locked in the mixed messages of the tomb's hieroglyphics, but the words the men chose to have inscribed over the entrance are unambiguously clear: joined in life and joined in death. Also unambiguous were the rules that governed a knight in the Middle Ages seeking the hand of a lovely maiden. These rules were laid out in an early medieval literary work called The Art of Courtly Love, written in the late 12th century. So let's take a peek at just what some of those rules were. Ladies, Do not befriend men with dismembered arms. They are without chivalry and probably have wandering hands as well. Ladies, do ensure that you go to bed with the right man. Beware of shape-shifting wizards in particular. Gentlemen, do seek out opportunities to defend your lady's honor, preferably with a violent display of martial skill. Extra marks if you present the head of your vanquished opponent as proof of your love. And gentlemen, do not wear a suggestively shaped sword. It's unlikely to convince a lady of your honorable intentions. So we see that all was not so dark in the Middle Ages, and love endured. And someone who knows all about love is Venus, the goddess of love. She's been an inspiration for artists throughout history, and no more so than in Sandro Botticelli's iconic work, The Birth of Venus, whose title is actually misleading. The painting shows not the watery birth of Venus, but her arrival in a colossal shell on the shores of Cyprus. The position of her hands conveying her modesty. She's flanked on the left by the wind god Zephyr, who blows her to a safe harbor. He's assisted by what's thought to be Aura, a wind-made deity. On the shore to the right, Venus is greeted by the Hora of spring, a personification of the season, who prepares to wrap the goddess in a floral cloak, roses twirling around in the wind being her symbol. This is the earliest surviving large-scale nude Venus of the Renaissance, the subject of a full-length nude female being highly unusual for the 15th century. We do see nudes in medieval art and even in the Renaissance art before this, but the nudes are usually Adam and Eve. Beginning in the 15th century, artists began to introduce heroic nudity within a biblical concept. Consider, for example, Donatelli's David. But in Botticelli, we have something exceptional, an almost life-size female nude that's fully pagan in its subject matter, pagan and undoubtedly the goddess of love. It's highly probable that the work was commissioned by a member of the Medici family. This hypothesis would seem to be borne out by the orange trees in the painting, which are considered an emblem of the Medici dynasty, on account of the assonance between the family name and the name of the orange tree, which at the time was Mala Medica. And it's also very likely that the muse who inspired many of Botticelli's women, including this Venus, was a well-known young blonde woman living in Florence at the time. Her name was Simonetta, and she was the wife of Marco Vespucci, cousin of the famous Amerigo Vespucci, whose name was given to the new continent of America. Simonetta was a legendary beauty, and the Medici were besotted with her, especially Giuliano, Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother. He openly flaunted his admiration for her, despite her being married. She died very young, at the age of 23, and is buried in Ognissanti Church in Florence. Botticelli asked to be buried at her feet, and the Vespucci family agreed. You can still see their tombs in this church today. Seemingly, Botticelli was unconcerned with the budding Renaissance interest in realism and perspective. The figures are weightless. They don't stand firmly on the ground the way we often expect Renaissance figures to stand. And the figure of Venus forms this serpentine shape that actually would almost be an impossible way to stand, certainly when you're surfing to shore on a seashell. Note also that the figures don't cast shadows. Nonetheless, what we're looking at is still an incredibly beautiful and erotic image, one which continues to inspire social media aficionados to this day, as we see here. So just as Venus, the Roman name, or Aphrodite, Greek mythology, features prominently in painting in Renaissance Europe, so does her son Cupid, the god of desire. In Lorenzo Lotto's work, we see him armed with his bow and arrows. Lorenzo Lotto painted this marriage portrait of a couple from Bergamo, Marsilio Casati and Faustina Assenica, in 1523. The portrait uses Renaissance-era symbolism to express the goals and ideals of marriage in the 16th century. Bride and groom are wearing elegant and costly clothing to indicate their wealthy status. The bride wears several expensive pieces of jewelry, including a gold chain draped over her shoulders, composed of many links, and this was known as a bond of love. The concept of a happy union is conveyed in metaphorical terms by a smiling Cupid who has a supply of arrows he carries in a basket strapped to his chest, who holds a yoke behind the couple and places a sprig of laurel, a symbol of virtue, on the shoulder of each. Yet another symbol associated with love is honeysuckle, as depicted a little over 100 years later, when Peter Paul Rubens painted himself and his wife in a luscious setting, a honeysuckle bower. You can almost smell the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle emanating from the garden alcove in this full-length portrait of Rubens and his new wife, Isabella Brandt. Few paintings convey the promise of wedded bliss and marital fidelity as this double portrait, likely painted as a gift for Isabella's father. Now, honeysuckle is a climbing shrub which here surrounds, embraces, and protects the newlyweds. Since ancient times, it's been the traditional symbol of good feeling, devotion, loyalty, happiness, and everlasting love. As its sweet-smelling flowers draw in bees, birds, butterflies, and as dusk falls, moths, so lovers are drawn to amorous feelings through the plant's entwining embrace. Although Rubens sits higher than his wife on a stool, the painting nevertheless suggests, if not a marriage of equals, then a loving partnership. And we see this in the depiction of their joined hands. At the close of a marriage ceremony, the right hands of the spouses were brought together by the matron of honor, representing the goddess Juno, indicating that the spouses had entered into a marriage under Roman law. The right hand was sacred to Fides, the deity of fidelity. The joining or clasping of the right hands by two people signified harmony, friendship, and loyalty, as well as fidelity between the couple after death, when the deceased would be reunited with their spouse. Sadly, Isabella would die around 15 years later at the age of 34, probably of bubonic plague, which left Rubens devastated. The posthumous portrait to commemorate Isabella reveals his abiding attitude toward his wife, whom in her epitaph he had called his, quote, excellent companion. She's shown with her right hand holding a small book in the same position as Rubens' right hand in the honeysuckle bower. This time, however, Rubens is not there to support it. Instead, she cradles her own right breast with her left hand. In the background is a column overgrown in vine, which possesses the same emblematic significance of the dead tree as in the Latin motto translated, "Friendship lasting even beyond death." The portrait is thus a painting of both loss and the promise of eternal life and love. Now, Rembrandt also did a double portrait about 40 years later, but unlike Rubens' couple, the identities of the sitters generated quite a bit of controversy. The work gained its name in the early 19th century when an Amsterdam art collector identified the couple as that of a Jewish father bestowing a necklace upon his daughter on her wedding day. This is no longer, however, the favored interpretation. Rather, most commonly accepted is the identification of the figures as the biblical couple Isaac and Rebekah. And they're described in the book of Genesis, a view supported by an earlier Rembrandt drawing of the couple with the same theme, which shows them in a similar composition. The drawing reveals the characteristic and instantly recognizable gesture of the man reaching out to place a caressing hand on the breast of the woman. This double portrait was likely intended as what's known as a portrait historié, or historiated portrait, where two real people dressed up for their portrait. Having one's portrait painted in the guise of an historical or biblical figure may seem strange to us now, but the portrait historié was surprisingly common in the 17th century. Whether the patrons were dressing up as biblical figures and thereby hoping to lay claim to their virtues, or as mythological figures demonstrating erudition or theatrical ties, historiated portraits existed comfortably alongside the more typical portraits of stern-faced people wearing black. Now, I think we're ready to lighten up a bit and take a look at one of the most powerful evocations of love in the history of art, painted by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, who, along with Francois Boucher, was one of the most renowned artists of the Rococo style in France. His works tell the story of love in an effortless and beautiful way, no more so than in his four-panel work entitled The Progress of Love, which depicts the 4 ages of love. But first, a bit of background. The work is linked with the career of Jeanne Bessus, Countess de Barry, the last mistress of the aging Louis XV. Du Barry came from a humble background and as a young woman was a housekeeper, a hairdresser, a shopkeeper, and a sex worker. Louis XV fell in love with her in 1768, gave her a title, and elevated her to the position of official royal mistress. The king, who died in 1774, spent the last 5 years of his life with du Barry. Adored and despised by her contemporaries, Madame du Barry became an important patron of the arts in the twilight of the Ancien Regime, just before the French Revolution. Among her remarkable enterprises was the renovation of the chateau at Le Valenciennes, just west of Paris, for which she commissioned a music pavilion designed by a prominent architect, Claude Nicolas Ledoux. The architect finished in a year, and the best artists, sculptors, craftsmen were employed to decorate the pleasure pavilion, including Jean-Honoré Fragonard, the renowned Rococo artist, who was given 1 room to decorate. These were to be the most important paintings at Le Valenciennes, and the artist, the patron, and the architect shows the story of the progress of love, 4 canvases depicting the 4 stages of love. So just envision, as you entered the pavilion, you would have seen 2 paintings on either side of a window looking out into a garden. First, the pursuit. So on the left of the door, you'd see the pursuit, a flirtatious proposal in which a young man springs out to offer a flower to his would-be mistress. She's running away, but not too fast, surrounded by chaperones. In the background is a statue of 2 putti who are pulling back a dolphin. Sculptures are key to understanding the story in Fragonard's paintings. Dolphins were Jupiter's agents in love affairs. They were the beasts that he sent to capture the beautiful maidens. In this painting, they're symbols of arrested or expectant desire. So desire is in the air, but love is not happening quite yet. On the right-hand side of the window, you would see the second panel, the meeting, a furtive meeting in which the lover scales the wall of a garden. The girl is definitely aware he's coming and looking forward to seeing him. The sculpture here shows Venus, the goddess of love, holding a quiver of arrows away from the young Cupid, the god of love. Love is not quite ready to take place. The god of love is impatient, and the goddess of love is holding back. Again, love is not quite ready to take place. Now, turning yourself around in the room, looking with the garden behind you, you would come to number 3 in the series, to the left-hand side of the door you entered. And here would be the lover crowned, depicting consummation or marriage, where the girl crowns her lover. Everything is in bloom. The garden is at its most verdant, floral. We can almost smell the scents of the peonies, roses, the orange tree, and the myrtle tree. The lovers, who are being recorded for posterity by the young artist, are actually wearing theatrical costume, which audiences would recognize as stage performing costume. In the statuary, Cupid has fallen asleep. His little quiver is empty as his work is done. So in this panel, love has finally given full expression. The 4th and last picture in the series on the other side of the entryway would be love letters. In love letters, a man and a woman are shown reading letters which while tenderly embracing, suggesting reminiscence of early courtship from a position of greater security. At their feet is a spaniel signifying fidelity, and they're watched over by a statue personifying friendship, who refuses to surrender the heart she holds at her chest to the Cupid who reaches for it. In addition to the sculpture, through which Fragonard uses the different emblems and motifs to lead us through the story, he's also a master of landscape. We see in the early painting of the pursuit the growing excitement. Suddenly trees and flowers are burgeoning in the meeting, but everything is in full bloom once we get to the lover crowned. And finally, when we get to love letters, the narrative reaches resolution as reflected in the sky and trees. The dark clouds and rustling branches of earlier panels have given way to the restful glow of a calm twilight and a sense of contentment. Now, as hard as it is for us to believe, Madame de Barry was not pleased with the 4 paintings when she saw them hung on the walls, likely due to the contrast with the architectural setting for which they were intended, and she sent them back to Fragonard and didn't pay him for a year's work, quite a public rejection of his most ambitious paintings. This was a very hard blow, as you can imagine, for the artist, who actually left Paris for a year, traveling throughout Italy, perhaps to lick his wounds. It was the last major decorative series Fragonard would undertake. He kept the 4 paintings likely rolled up for the next 20 years until an appropriate venue was found. So that's quite a story. And those of you who visited the Timken, or when you visit, will see wonderful work by Boucher and one by Fragonard, and we do have statues in them, and you'll be able to see these great artists in person. So the Rococo style of art was short-lived as discontent in France was growing, with a turn to more serious art. The neoclassical style, with its greatest proponent, Jacques-Louis David. This work is the story of Cupid and Psyche, which would have been very well known in 1817. And he used this work to explore the conflict between idealized love and physical reality. So here we see a very different Cupid. Cupid, who is lover of the beautiful mortal Psyche, visited her nightly on the condition that she would not know his identity. Now, Cupid is usually depicted as an ideal adolescent, but here David presents him as an ungainly teenager smirking at his sexual conquest. David took inspiration from a number of ancient texts, including an obscure, recently published Greek poem that describes Cupid as a mean-spirited brat with dark skin, flashing eyes, and curly hair. As you might imagine, the work drew mixed reviews. Some people were thrilled by the novelty of it, and they understood that David was doing a subject they'd seen many times before, but in a way they'd never seen before, in a way that gave life to the classical tradition. Other people thought it was crass and vulgar and wrong to present these gods that were supposed to be so beautiful in a way that didn't seem to take into account the nobility appropriate for the tradition. David would likely have been very amused by all this. And here's a fun fact. Psyche in Greek means both soul and butterfly, and likely why David depicts 2 butterflies in the work. On the left, you see one such butterfly decorated on the bottom of the bed. In the middle, a very traditional neoclassical butterfly. And then on the right, you have this insect that's flying above their heads. And perhaps it's meant to be a bit of a joke. You have this goddess associated with the butterfly, but David is showing you that it's a real living insect, apparently a cabbage butterfly. So not a multicolored, beautiful insect, but something much more common, ordinary, and real. Now, one cannot speak of painted love without discussing perhaps the most iconic and recognizable image of love in the artistic realm. And of course, I'm referring to The Kiss by Gustav Klimt. The Kiss constitutes the height of Klimt's, what's known as his golden phase, which lasted between about 1901 and 1909. His keen interest in gold was ignited first by his father's occupation as a goldsmith, and then by the mosaics of San Vitale, which he'd seen on 2 visits to Ravenna in 1903. For Klimt, The flatness of the mosaics and their lack of perspective and depth enhanced their golden brilliance. And here he used a powdered gold coating, creating a shimmering background that acts as a golden cocoon for the lovers. The work is a menage of different schools of art. As noted, the gold leaf harkens back to such Byzantine mosaic artworks as he'd seen in Ravenna. The composition also reflects the influence of Japanese woodblock prints, of which Klimt was an avid collector, and which was also evident in some earlier Impressionist paintings. The flat, intricate patterns of the meadow and the contrasting patterns of the two lovers' cloaks reflects the arts and crafts movement of the era. And overall, Klimt imbued the kiss with elements of his signature Art Nouveau style patterns, creating a very sensual, atmospheric composition. What we see is an embracing couple concealed behind a large golden cloak. This heavy embellishment protects and encircles the couple, reiterating the immortality of their love. Two distinctive parts constitute the image. The first part, depicting the man, shows a repeating geometric black and white motif, symbolizing his strength, virility, and masculinity. Meanwhile, the second part portrays that of the woman, where Klimt uses flowers and circles to reflect images of femininity and maternity. It's been suggested that the embrace is a double portrait, where the lovers are symbolic of the artist and his long-term partner, Emily Floge. However, the female figure could also be another of Klimt's many muses or romantic conquests. As Klimt painted relentlessly, he also loved women relentlessly and had many lovers over his lifetime. We'll end our tour with a couple known for their tumultuous but enduring love, a rather unusual double portrait by Frida Kahlo, depicting her and her husband, the painter Diego Rivera. Kahlo began this work in the late summer of 1940, after the artist's divorce. And as so often in her works, Kahlo makes metaphor literal. The painting expresses Frida's desire to possess Diego Rivera, who continues betraying her with his affairs with other women, but she cannot stop thinking about him. Hence, she painted a miniature portrait of him on her brow, indicating the obsessive love she has for the famous Mexican artist. Kahlo wears the traditional Tehuana costume Diego loved and a crown of leaves that seems to spread like a web, as if Kahlo was trapped like a spider in both the picture and the obsession. But that wasn't the end of their love. By the time the picture was finished in 1943, they had remarried. This brings our tour to a close, and I hope you've enjoyed viewing the works of L'Amour, dating back to antiquity. I think it's safe to say that as long as love is in the air, artists will depict it in their works. Thank you all, and I welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. This was wonderful. And I really enjoyed seeing these beautiful paintings and what a wonderful selection of artworks. We have a few questions from Facebook. Someone wanted to know, is there a painting by Fragonard at the Timken?
Yes, we do have one of his young lovers playing games, painting Dead Man's Buff, Blind Man's Buff, Dead Man's Buff, Blind Man's Buff. It's a small work, and we also have our largest work by Francois Boucher, also of lovers. So by all means, and it's recently had undergone conservation. So please come visit. You'll just be thrilled by seeing those two works.
And I should add, the Timken Museum of Art is always free. So if you're in San Diego or if you live here in San Diego, you can always come by, just walk into the galleries to enjoy the beautiful art. We have one more question from Facebook. Someone wanted to know, where are most of Klimt's works located? Do you know, Eleanor?
I don't know most. I know that Austria certainly has a very large collection. And I won't say ironically, but interestingly, the new NEAU, the new museum in New York, which is right near the Metropolitan Museum on the Upper East Side, the new gallery, which has many works of the Expressionists, the German Expressionists, has a very large Klimt collection.
Okay, wonderful. I see that we have one more question. Marian wanted to know, how was love shown during Victorian time? Do you know?
Well, I did. That's an interesting question. I can probably say it wasn't as obvious as other times because I did not run into a large collection of art of that period. I don't know the answer. That's a good question. Thank you for that. I will look into it.
We will all look it up. Thank God.
Yes.
Thanks for Google, right? Where we can look up these questions. Well, I see there's one more message. Oh, thank you very much for the wonderful talk, says Adrian. And we have Teresa saying, thank you, Eleanor. That was a great talk, very informative. And before we part, I wanted to mention that our next virtual talk is coming up on Thursday, February 6th at 11 o'clock. Please mark your calendars. We will have an outside speaker. Her name is Mariska Beekenkamp Vladimirov, and she will be talking about the Dutch Golden Age and 6 paintings from the Timken collection. So please save your date if you're interested in listening in. Again, this talk will take place on Thursday, February 6th at 11 o'clock. So I see there's no more questions. So thank you very much to Eleanor for this lovely presentation. And please, for everyone who listened in, thank you for joining us. We have all of our virtual talks posted on our website under our events and also on our calendar. So if you liked what you saw and you would like to listen in another time, all of the dates and Zoom links are on our website. Thank you a lot to our Facebook viewers as well. And again, thank you so much to Eleanor
Take care. Thank you.
for preparing for this talk. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.